There we go. Okay. Hi, I have a question for Ridge Shinn. Ridge, in one of the slides that you showed talking about the benefits of grazing, you mentioned specifically rotational grazing. And this is a term now that's being used by Paul Hawken and his Project Drawdown and others. And Alan Savory goes to great lengths to point out the differences between rotational grazing, which is a very old method, and the holistic grazing that he does. And in looking at this, I wonder if the meaning of the definition for the word or the phrase rotational grazing may itself evolve to mean holistic grazing. But for the benefit of those assembled here, could you say just a couple of words about the difference between rotational grazing and what others are doing?
Sure. I think it's not simple. There's a lot of definitions. You know, one of the people that popularized rotational grazing is Jim Garish, and he wrote a book called Management Intensive Grazing. And there's a lot of different systems. But there is, the bottom line is there's no recipe. So for instance, with my cow-calf producers that I'm going to connect with to do this program, if they only move the cattle every 4 days, that's perfectly fine. Now, when I'm finishing these cattle, I'm probably going to move them 6 times a day. But my goals are totally different. And what's important is the animal performance. You know, what we're looking for, and also the lifestyle goals of whoever is doing the grazing. So there's no kind of right answer, I guess, is the answer to the question. What we've learned is that by mob grazing, by intensifying the density of the animals, putting 500 per acre, 1,000 per acre, that the results are stunning, that we make tremendous changes to the grass when we do that. But that there's all different, and the system is very forgiving. So if you didn't do it quite right, then you come back. I actually use Alan Savory's holistic planned grazing chart, where we chart every day what we think the cattle are going to do for the whole year. But as soon as you make the plan, it changes. You know, did it rain? Didn't it rain? You'll go into paddocks. You know, what I do is put a dot with a colored pencil in every paddock I think the cattle are going to be in. When I sit down in February and map it out, and then I color them in once they went there. So you get a record of how many pounds of dry matter each paddock generated, and some of it's very deceiving. You'd stand there and say, well, this one's going to take me 4 days, that one's going to take me 10 days, and it's going to be different. So there's no easy answer.
I have 2 questions, one for John and one for Tom. For John, there's a group, the New England Food Solutions, which has talked about 80% and 50% of our own food grown in New England, and I'm wondering what you think of that particular planning process. Mm-hmm. And for Tom, at Cornell, David Pimentel has been doing, or had been doing, a long-term agricultural test of conventional versus organic, and I'm wondering if you've looked at his work and what may have happened since I guess he's retired now.
Well, I would start by saying that the food vision for New England was largely started at the University of New Hampshire in the Sustainability Institute, and our university has been extremely active in that. All 6 New England states have an involvement. They have summits in each of the states, rotating to a different state each year. I think they're fundamentally very sound, but one complaint that I have is that they focus a great deal on the longer term future, the 50-year period, or 2050, 2075, that type of thing. And I think that if carried too far can be a little bit self-defeating, because we need popular support, and it provides an easy excuse for people not to be concerned about it if you spend most of your time talking about 2050 or beyond. I often argue with them, and I participate with them as well, but I often argue with them that if we could have more 10-year and 15-year periods, we'd get a lot more activism from the general population.
I have not looked at Dr. Pimentel's work. I have enormous respect for him. There is a beautiful paper written by Andre Loy, spelled L-E-U, who was the president of IFOAM. The paper was published by the United Nations Commission on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in September of last year, entitled Wake Up Before It's Too Late, which summarized about 50 different farming system trials around the world. I don't recall seeing Cornell's in that group of those summarized, but I will look that up. But you might want to check out Andre Loy's paper.
I'm coming here as a customer. First of all, I'd like to just thank everyone who's presented today. It's been fantastic. But as a customer, I've been looking for organ meats, and it's getting harder and harder to find them. It would be wonderful, Rich Shinn, if you offered kidneys, livers, things like that from grass-fed cattle. And is that in your plan?
Yes, that's absolutely in our plan. We actually have the farm in North Carolina, we just received a USDA value-added development grant, which is specifically to look at what we call the other 70% of the animal. Because 30% of the animal ends up in a bag of meat. But then you have the bones, you have the hide, you have the head, you have the organs, you have the drop. You have all these other things that are not optimized at this point in time. So we absolutely are looking at that. We're looking at bone broth, find somebody to make bone broth. As soon as we get to a scale, then it makes sense. You know, that's one of the things that the big boys have over us smaller people, is that they actually, in the big slaughterhouses, they'll take all the pancreases out of all the animals, and they'll have half a truckload of pancreases to do something with, which go to, I think they go to medical research or something. But, you know, part of it is scale. If you kill 4 animals and you have 4 oxtails, it's not a whole lot you can do with that. But absolutely, it's on our horizon.
Include the thymus.
Okay? Give me your card. We'll make sure you get some.
I'd just like to add something to that person's question, and that just goes back to this whole idea of, in nature, not only are there no monocultures, but there's no waste. And so we have to, in this idea of diversity, embrace the idea of being open to rediscovering some parts of the animal that we may have forgotten, or being open to trying different flavors and different pulses and grains and vegetables and so forth, because we need that palette of things to sustain us. We can't just have all our eggs in one basket and rely on a few big crops and a few animal parts.
Ridge, if I understood you correctly, one of your goals was to manage for bobolinks, and that you didn't graze the animals until they had fledged. I guess my first question is, did I understand you correctly? And second, if I did, what do you do with your cattle? I mean, where do you graze them at that point?
Yeah, very good question. And you know, I don't agree with all the policies of the bobolinks and staying off the ground while the bobolinks are fledging. That comes mainly from the typical agricultural practice is you mow hay in May. So the bobolinks come back, lay their eggs, and you mow hay, and you kill all the birds, all the fledgling. So they said, well, just stay out. Now, it's my contention that the cattle could live with the bobolinks. I think the buffaloes probably lived with the bobolinks and didn't stay out of the bobolink territory. And it's fascinating because you get on the web and you look at the research, and you know what they did is they found a bobolink nest and they put a camera there. And what they got was the cow's nose coming and knocking the camera over, because cows are eternally curious creatures. But they also are not, you know, some people have the vision that the cow is like a haybine and it goes along and it eats everything. The cows are incredibly selective. They, with their tongue, will take this piece of clover and that and that. And I can't see them destroying the bird's nest. But I haven't convinced the land trust who has this, you know, who are involved in this program to do that yet, to let me run the cattle in and see what happens. But
So do you just graze them on other land that's not
yeah, the other land is, the bobolinks have to have a large open grassland. So in other words, I have other places that are a smaller property, you know, 5 acres in the woods. Bobolinks won't come in. They need a much more expansive grassland for them to come in. They're very fearful of predators. They don't like to nest near stone walls, so they need a big open expanse. So there's only a few grassland properties like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I guess I'll address my question to John. The most recent issue of Mother Jones magazine had an article on how the 4-H clubs are pushing DuPont Pioneer seed in developing countries to small farmers. And as a part of the land-grant universities, I was wondering if you might address how we could, I don't know, put pressure on them to change that type of practice. Thank you.
I think the best pressure would come from the youth involved and their parents and families. We do have to realize that the land-grant universities of America, as Wendell Berry knows very well, have largely been taken over in the 50s, 60s, 70s, on up to more recent times by industrial agriculture, factory farming, the research grants provided by corporations, and so on and so forth. So this is a problem. Our land grants here in New England are a bit more moderate because our environment is more moderate. We don't have all of that large-scale agriculture, but many people in the land grants have still thought traditionally along lines of being very defensive about factory farming and so forth, and that filters down to 4-H. And as I say, the people who would be most effective would be the youth, and particularly their parents and families, in motivating the 4-H to go in other directions. And I do know of some families that have rejected 4-H and are trying to involve themselves with private nonprofits that are outside of the public sector to get some kind of a similar experience. But that is a problem. You're correctly identifying a problem there. I think it's improving, but it has roots that indicate it's a problem.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to say we must be back here at 4:30. It is now 4:13 by the official clock. So if you want to take a break, please can take that into consideration. And we welcome the next question and any other questioners who want to come.
I guess this would be for Ridge, but I'm really not sure who. But when I grew up, my family had land in the Catskill Mountains in a dairy region, and I threw bales of hay into trucks when I was in junior high, so I kind of knew what they were doing. And their typical grazing practice was the cows would just sort of slowly filter up to the high pastures during the day and then come down to the barn at night. And then the manure that was generated in the barn was gathered and then spread on the fields via manure spreaders. And when you talk about holistic management, it seems like, well, here's holistic management and here's, quote, conventional practice. It's like, you know, glyphosate, holistic management. But I haven't seen any comparison to, say, a third or different kind of practice, like one that would have been traditional and, you know, this would be in the 60s in the Northeast. And so I'm wondering, how do you characterize the variety of possible practices, and why is holistic management the one that you pick as opposed to some other one?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. And you know, the conventional practice in a dairy farm, like the dairy farms in the town I live in 30 years ago, there was a night pasture, and all the cattle would go out into the night pasture every night and come back in the daytime. But they went to the same night pasture every night, and they came back in. And then, of course, they did make hay, and they put up the hay, and they put it in the barn. The challenge is a lot of those systems don't make money. That's why they are no longer, the many, many dairy farms are gone from the Northeast, because they were too capital intensive. And it is fascinating. You know, there's a conventional farm in Hardwick, just a little story, and they were doing everything conventionally. I went to a farmers meeting, and I was really a renegade, and these three mainline farmers were talking to me, and they said, you know, you can't do that, you can't do that. I said, no, that's what we're going to do. And I said, you have the chance of making maybe $15,000, $20,000 a year profit. And they go, oh, that's nothing. I said, well, how much do you make? And he said, the farmer said, well, I make $15,000 in a good year. I said, well, when's the last time you had a good year? He said, well, it was a couple of years ago. I said, well, why can't you change? He said, well, I can't. I'm too capital intensive. I have the silo I paid for, I get the tractor, I get this, and I get that. So it was funny, about a month and a half later, I was at a conference out in New York, and I was speaking, and I was using him as an example of how locked in a lot of the conventional farmers are. And after the conference, this young lady came up, and she said, that sounds just like my father. I said, it was your father. And she came back to Hardwick, and she started a raw milk dairy. So she was doing grass on the same farm, raw milk, and she was getting $8 a gallon. And guess what? Today, the father's organic, grass-fed dairy, making cheese. But I mean, it's you know, it's really, that system, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, it just doesn't optimize the opportunities. In other words, I could go to that farmer managing like that, could extend the growing season, and make more money. You know, in my case, I don't have a tractor, and I don't make hay. So I have to buy it, so I know really what it costs. Most farmers who go and make it and have their kids throw the bales don't really know what the costs are. It's just something you do. The family gets together, it's kind of fun, we do it. We don't know what it costs. So I know what it costs because I take the money out of my pocket. So for 40 cows, I feed 2 bales, it's $100 a day. So if I can extend my season 1 week, I put $700 back in my pocket. And that's kind of the reality. And so people say, well, it snows. Yeah, like it snowed in Buffalo, 6 feet. So cattle are not going to graze through that snow. But that's going to be, that's only like a month or 2 months out of the year. So if conventional farmers can change, they can make more money. But it takes time. In my town, the conventional farmers, you know, I would hear back through the grapevine what they said about me because they could see what I'm doing. He leaves his cattle outside all winter. He doesn't feed them hay. and now they're coming around because of the economics, really. They're saying, oh, we can make some money? Now they're interested. I don't know if that answers your question. There's a lot of meander.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to see if any of you could speak to how some of the ideas that we've been talking about this weekend, specifically carbon sequestration, can be integrated into small-scale models of community agriculture and urban agriculture and backyard farming, some of the things that you guys have been talking about.
There are 500 million smallholder farms on this planet. There are perhaps 2+ billion smallholder farmers on the planet. There are 3.5 billion hectares of grasslands and 1.5 of agricultural farming land. We don't have to convert 1 acre of land in the United States to holistic regenerative practices to accomplish our goals with carbon sequestration to save this ecosystem for humanity going forward. If we have some of the ranchers and farmers in the US convert to the more economical, more rational, healthier, more nutritious, more profitable approach, that's great. There's a gigantic role for the smallholder farmer. And whether that smallholder farmer is a CSA in a rural area or suburban area in the United States, or the hundreds of millions of them that are around the world, we must bring them into the network that is sequestering carbon through regenerative practices.
And I would add to that, never underestimate the quantity of food that can be produced within the cities and particularly within the suburbs. Every square inch of lawn in America is by definition tillable acreage. And the quantity that can be produced is an overwhelming amount. So that should always be considered.
And if you're looking for an entry point, the whole compost movement is one that I think is ready to be harnessed because people, I think of compost as waste and food recycling, but they haven't connected it yet to climate. And if you are doing something in, in a small urban environment or on your school grounds or something, and you initiate a composting program, that's a great way to sort of jumpstart this whole carbon sequestration conversation and demonstrate it.
I have one more quick point on that. During World War II, we had victory gardens. We need a new victory, a new definition of victory over our climate challenge, and we need victory farming. And just as we ended up during World War II producing, 40+% of our produce in victory gardens, at some point, pardon? Within 3 years. Within 3 years, right. So once the energy gets behind that concept, it is exciting to think what could happen with victory farming on a community level in this country.
Thank you.
Well, I guess maybe we should take our break then so that we're back here promptly at 4:30. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.